Hello, this is Rochelle, and in this video we are going to talk about factoring polynomials using the AC method. This is a method that will work every time for any three-term polynomial that is factorable. So if guessing and checking doesn't work, or it's not a special factor, this is your go-to. So remember, this is standard form for a polynomial, a trinomial specifically, and this is the factored form. So that's the goal. This is the goal of what we want things to look like right here. So this is you kind of have to memorize some steps here. But the first step, always in all factoring problems, is to factor out the greatest common factor. I'm going to go ahead and remind you that the GCF is the greatest common factor. So if there is one, we want to factor that out right away. Then we do need to remember that ax squared plus bx plus c is the standard form for anything written like this. So in this case, my a value, which would be right here, would be 1. My b value would be 8, and my c value would be 15. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to multiply that a and that c together. And we're going to list the factors of a times c, that product. Then we're going to find the factors, which are basically two numbers and I'll go ahead, just two numbers. I'll just write two numbers here that multiply to a times c and add to b. Then we're going to rewrite the middle term using the factors that we found in step 3. And then we get to finish the problem by factoring by grouping. So if you didn't understand factoring by grouping, you may want to go back and watch that video. So let's actually see what this looks like in practice, because that was just a lot of words. So my first job, remember, is to factor out the greatest common factor. In this case, there is no greatest common factor besides 1. So we're going to identify a here is going to be 1, the number in front of 1. And b here, or c here, is going to be 12, the number that's all by itself. So a times c, which is the step b here, so here's step b, is going to equal 1 times 12, or I'm just going to write that as 12. And I want to list the factors, okay? Now, we can combine steps B and C here, but I like to be fairly rote in how I do it to begin with. And so I just start dividing. If I divide it by 1, I get 12. If I divide it by 2, I get 6. If I divide it by 3, I get 4. Now, I can put 4 over here again, but then I'm going to get 3. So these are kind of the same factors, unless 1 had to be negative. Then these would be two different factors. But in this case, I'm looking at it and they need to multiply to be a positive number and add. So let's see what my b value is negative 7. So in step C, I want to find the two factors that multiply to AC and add to B. Now, since B is negative, all of these values have to be negative, because then a negative 3 times a negative 3 will give me a positive 12. So I'm just going to go ahead and add each of these. This is going to be negative 13. This is going to be negative 8. And this is going to be negative 7. So it looks like these two, I'll go ahead and circle them with this. These two are the ones that add to negative 7, because I want them to add to this number. I want them to add to this number and multiply to this number. So, in some people, when the a value is 1, you'll see this whole multiply, multiply to a number and add to a number. And so people will put up here the 12 and they'll put up here the -7, and then they'll just start writing numbers here like -3 and -4. But I'm going to go ahead and try and follow this step here. So step D tells me to rewrite the middle term. So that means I'm going to copy down the first term and the last term. And then instead of writing -7x, I'm going to take these two factors over here. Shouldn't be an equal sign. That looks like an equal sign and I don't like it. I can't seem to erase it though. So I'll just go ahead and put a plus sign there. We're going to put an X on both of them. And so what I have done is I've rewritten this middle term as a sum of two things. That is the weirdest step in this whole thing. It's kind of the step that you have to remember. It just feels so odd. And then we're going to finish by factor by grouping. Now, factor by grouping is we group the first two together and we factor out the common factor. The common factor in these first two is x. And if we factor out x, we'll be left with x and -3. We always want to copy this sign down. I'll go ahead and put this in a different color. Oh, let's use blue. We haven't used blue. So I'm going to put minus. Then I'm going to look at what these two have in common, and they have a 4 that can be divided. If I divide this by -4, I'm just going to be left with x. If I divide 12 by -4, I'm going to be left with -3. Again, at any step in factoring, you can check your work by multiplying it out. And if we multiplied this out, we would get the previous line. But as it is, when I look at this, I see two things that are in common. I see this, that both of these terms have. And so I'm going to factor that out in front. And so in essence, it's like I'm dividing by x minus 3. Those are going to cancel. So what I'll be left with is the x and the -4. Now we came up with this when we did the previous lesson on guess and check. But again, to check your answers, all you have to do is FOIL it out. Outside would be this, inside would be that. And I end up with -7x. You'll notice that these are in a different order than these ones right here. It doesn't matter which order you put them in. You'll still get the same answer. Now, this technique isn't always the first technique I use when a is equal to 1. But when a is equal to something very large, then I will use this method. So let's go ahead and practice that again. So if we look at this, remember my first step is to factor out the greatest common factor. There is no greatest common factor. So my next step is going to be to multiply A and C together. Let me see what I did that in purple. So A times C would be 12 times 40, or 480. Wow, that is a huge number. Again, we've got this plus and minus, so that tells me that both of my numbers are going to be negative. Now, if I want to do this the way I was doing it, I would do 1. Then I would do 2, which would be, 240. I can see I'm quite a ways off. So I would skip maybe, I know that 10 will go into it. You can use a calculator to do this. That's getting closer because when I add them, my B value, if I look, is -47. And this is -58. That's much closer than this, which was -481. So I'm going to go ahead. I know that 12 should go into it, and that would be -40, if I'm thinking correctly. That's -52. Now, the next one I can think of, I know 13 won't work, 14, because there's no 7 there. So I'm going to try -15. And if I divide that on my calculator, I can just make this positive. I'm going to get 3, 45, 30. I'm going to get 32. So I'm going to have -32 here. And if I look at this, these two numbers will add to be -47. So these are the two numbers I'm going to use. I'm going to stack, put this each with an X, and then I'm going to take this and I'm going to rewrite it. I'm going to keep my first and last terms exactly as they are, but I'm going to take this negative 47x and I'm going to rewrite it as negative 15x minus 32x. That's that key step. Once we have that, then we need to go back to factor by grouping. Again, you can review that video if you want. I'm going to go ahead and group these two together and these two together. If I look at what's in common here, I would get a 3x. Wow, okay. And that would leave me with a 4x and a minus 5. Remembering to copy my sign down, what will go into, 8 will go into both of those. And so then I will have 4x, negative 8 times negative 5 would give me positive 40. I'll know I did it correctly if I see the same two factors there, if I see that same factor. And I'm going to factor that out. And remember, what I'm going to be left over with is 3x minus 8. Now, I'm not going to go through and multiply that out to check my answer because I'm feeling pretty good about it. So again, let's do this one more time. Wow, excuse me. And we want to remember our first job is to factor out anything in common. Now, you want to make some letters in common there, but I think I can factor out a 3. That would be x. Oh, wait. They do all have a y in common. So I'm going to factor out a y. So when I'm factoring out that greatest common factor, it's like I'm dividing by 3y, and I'm just going to be left with the x squared. Or another way to think of it is 3y times what will give me 3x squared y. By that same thing, this is going to be 5x, and then this is going to be minus 7. Now for this one, I would probably use guess and check. Did I do that right? 3 times 7 is not 42. Where am I looking? That's going to be 14. Wow. I was kind of thinking ahead to my guessing and checking because I see 7 and 2 right away. But again, if you want to use the AC method, we kind of ignore our 3y right now. And we would multiply together 1, which is our A value. A times C here is going to be 1 times negative 14 or negative 14. Now here, you will notice that I have a negative. So that means this is either going to be, these are going to be negative, or these will be negative. So I could write all of the factors out here. Because if I look at it, these two right here will add up to be positive 5. But I want them to add to be negative 5. So these are the two that I am going to put in my middle. So I'm going to have x squared and minus 14. But again, I'm going to have here minus 7x minus 2x. I'm going to go ahead and move it up a little because I didn't leave myself a lot of room. Then I factor by grouping again. These two have an x in common. And these two, making sure I copy that sign down, are going to have a 2 in common and a negative x. What am I doing here? Oh, goodness. I'm like, I did something wrong because this is a positive. So this should have been a positive, which makes this a positive. I knew I was going to get something wrong because I realized if I put a negative 7 here and a negative here, I would have got a positive 14. But as it is, they do have the x minus 7 in common, and then what's going to be left over is the x plus 2. Thanks for joining me.